Sorry about that. You just throw a little blanket over them. No, they'll be fine.
How many do you have?
Two.
Are they mates?
They're egg mates, so they're sisters. Their names are Duck and Goose, and they're a pair of little bitches. But
Which is a reasonable compliment from the land that calls everything mildly annoying a cunt.
well, that is my favorite word, but I've been chastised for using it so much over the past 2 years.
Why would that be the case? Language policing? I don't
I
get it.
think like in America, it's like a slur to women, isn't it? But in Scotland, it's a term of endearment. So like my mum calls me a cunt all the time. I call my mum and dad a cunt all the time. It's just, you know. So you can use it as an insult, but for the most part, like me and my boyfriend will sit and call one another cunt all day, and it just increases our love. So like I don't understand the like hatred for that word that some people have, but I think it's beautiful.
In America, it's probably the harshest word, other than the N word, and some people trying to make retard as offensive as anything else, but it's just too useful and funny.
Yeah, retard doesn't it doesn't like offend retarded people, it offends retarded people, if you know
Yeah,
what I mean. There's a difference.
yeah, yeah. But can the retarded people understand that difference, or
No, because they're retarded. I'm gonna get you into so much trouble, Benjamin.
well, hopefully I can get you into trouble too. I am. I'm overdue for a canceling. Something
Yeah, it's been
started,
a
but I don't
while.
think it. Something started to happen, but I think that they actually had to read my tweet that they wanted to be offended about, and so they ran out of steam.
I know that you get into trouble with a particular group on Twitter quite often, and it's always very lovely to see. It's like, um, I don't know, because I remember I can't remember what you said. I think you made a joke, and I laughed at it, and people were like, "Why are you laughing?" I'm sorry, just I think Benjamin can be funny sometimes because I
He's
have a
just such a.
ridiculous fucking sense of humor. He's such a. I think that for the purpose of this conversation, we should use every 30 seconds.
If I can just edit it so it's not within the first 90 seconds, then YouTube will let it. Actually, I think the C word is up there on the algorithmic thing. Yeah, it's an American standard. Who do you get in trouble with?
There's a couple of different groups that I'm sure you're familiar with, and it depends on what my opinion is. So, like the TRAs or trans rights activists,
Yeah.
or some gender critical people, or radfems. There's so many fucking letters and groups going about these days. I'm not really sure who I'm pissing off anymore. But I put out a tweet the other day saying, happy Trans Awareness Week or month or whatever we're on. And people were like, why are you doing that? Because I have trans friends. So I'm not, I haven't changed that much since we first spoke like 2 years ago, and that I'm still very happily not planting myself in any camp. So for example, I went to the LGB Alliance in London, which I was very happy to go to. I'm friends with a lot of people that were there. That doesn't mean that I'm associated with that group, and it doesn't mean that I'm associated with gender critical people or trans rights activists or any other group. I'm just someone that has opinions. And so when people are like, oh, our side, this side, that side, I'm like, I don't know what fucking side you're talking about. Because you've probably seen this as well. Like, there's something very interesting happening where you've got the radfems on one side and the gender critical gay guys on the other side. And they're like locking horns because the radfems are saying they're misogynistic, and the gender critical gay guys are like, I have every right to speak about my concerns about this as you do. And I'm like, this is why this movement is not propelling anywhere near as quickly as the trans rights movement did, because you've got to give the trans rights movement something. They're a monolith, and they can charge forward and they all agree which is good and which is bad. Whereas, quote, my side is full of really petty infighting that I just try not to take part in because I don't see the benefit, really.
It can be a laugh. It can be a slight distraction, but I'm still trying to sort through my take on the treatment of a mentally ill person on the verge of suicide who was propped up as somebody to persecute by an incredibly righteous group of cliquish mean girls. And while the man is deeply flawed and in so much pain, I know that the interview that I had to eventually take down was helping specifically men.
Did you actually take it down?
The individual asked me to take it down.
Okay.
And then they kind of just flipped the table. A lot of pain, a lot of mental instability. But I know that interview was actually helping men specifically, and I'm sure women too, to see the outcome of certain demons. And if we can't gaze at those demons without having to kill them, or if we have to take everything personally and fight constantly, then the ability for us to understand deeply the underlying issues that are propelling behavior is incredibly diminished, as well as the service provided by just non-judgmentally allowing people to show, to express their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm still trying.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the exact same thing, but because I just sort of saw this recently, it's fresh in my mind. Where, you know, the lads that run the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, they're all trans men. I'm an advisor for that group, so I'm very fond of them. I think they do really important things. But I see the shit that they get, because in a lot of areas that they're talking about, people are like, "You're not a man, you can't talk about that," or something like that. And they're trying to bring awareness to certain problems that are happening. Their whole principle is we're looking for evidence-based research to make everyone's lives easier, so we can all be empathetic and we can all live together. And you're still going to have some people who are apparently, again, on this quote side, who will rail against that. And I just don't understand how, even if you disagree with someone, I listen to people I disagree with all the time because it teaches me stuff. Even if it doesn't change my mind, it opens up a perspective that I may have otherwise not had. And so whenever I see someone say something or post something, and then another group goes after them, is like, "You can't say that, you don't know that, we can't speak about that." And it's like, you're kind of being a hypocrite, because you complain about being censored all the time. But that's basically what your end goal is. Otherwise, why would you complain? And there's nothing wrong with like civil disagreement, but too often that's not what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing civil disagreement. I'm seeing, "You can't say that." And I've got a problem with that mentality, and I see it too often, unfortunately.
Well, so in order for that argumentative style that is taken up selectively, depending on the topic, to not derail conversation or to derail the purpose, insofar as there is a side that's probably mostly founded upon a common goal or a common purpose. And there's probably a lot of overlap with different purposes that kind of just coalesce around generally similar goal. My goal is my goal is to create human content, but with regards to the issue of investigating what's going on with gender, my goal is to raise awareness and to allow people to witness deeper discourse on that matter. And I also can't overlook that children are absolutely important and need to be provided protections, as much protection as possible. And I see that gender ideology, as it is manifested within queer theory, in all these institutions and taken up by certain strands of trans rights activism. That is very dangerous. It's anti-realistic, and it's anti-realism, and it just makes a mess of everybody that it incorporates. So that being my kind of position and my thrust, it allows me to interview all these different people who have similar goals or similar basic goals around that. But, the feminists have their own thing going on. The gender critical gay men have their own thing going on. The trans women, specifically in the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, have their own thing. And then the detransitioners, which are my favorite group because it's not an ideology, it's an experience, and it's based purely on an experience. So they all have something similar, but they're all perfectly unique because of that experience. That's the pool that
that is the interesting thing, because I know detransitioners who are rad femmes, who are gender critical gay men, who are left wing, who are right wing, and I wish that you were a detransitioner so I could invite you into some of these conversations so you could see for yourself where it's very civil. I'm not saying that it's like a shit show or anything like that, but there's no one pretends and just nods along. If someone says something that you disagree with, you say, no, I disagree with that, and this is why. And I've never been in a group chat where people were just saying, I'm not just going to nod along and pretend I'm fine with what you just said. I'm going to share my piece. And it's so wonderfully refreshing, because I remember back when I was a trans man, even though I was true scum, there was still certain things you couldn't say, in certain aspects. So, for example, saying that trans men are women, you couldn't say that. You could just say trans men might not be men, but they're not women, they're just trans men, which is fine. But if you were a particularly true scum trans man who was like, no, technically we're all women, we're just transitioning for the sake of alleviating gender dysphoria, but we're still women, that would cause a shit show. Whereas in the detrans groups that I'm in, it's fair game. Everyone shares their opinions and no one spits their dummy out and no one blocks people. Not no one. But for the most part, it's open conversation where it's like the only thing we have in common is that we've detransitioned. That's it. Everything else is different. We come from different backgrounds, countries, classes, etc., etc. And it's this wonderful thing where I've learned a lot from these groups that I otherwise wouldn't have learned. And even when we do disagree with one another, it's like we understand the only thing we have in common is detransition. And we are going to argue and we are going to disagree now and again. But you know what? We can be a fucking adult about it and not cry whenever an argument breaks out. We'll handle it like adults, which is probably the first group I've actually experienced that in, to be honest.
So what is I guess it doesn't have a purpose. It just has it's got to have some sort of purpose, like support or community, like a very broad purpose, and not a specific goal-oriented purpose, but rather just the act of communing around your experiences and sharing. And I guess offering some sort of support is kind of what keeps you guys together.
Well, it depends on the group, because I'm in several. So most of them are just chill out groups where if you're not feeling too well, if you're not doing too good, if you're struggling with, for example, you had the hysterectomy and you've just realised you want children, that's some deep shit. That's not something I've personally experienced, but I've spoken to young women going through that, and you just need to be able to speak to someone who can say, I get it. Like, I've experienced similar. But then there are more, for lack of a better word, activism groups, where if something pops up, we'll share links and say, oh, you might want to look at this, you might want to read this, you might want to respond to this. Do you guys want to come together and respond to this as a group of detransitioners? That's the quietest group. The most common ones are definitely just, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? Do you need to vent a little bit? That's really all you need.
On the level of the advocacy groups, how have you seen that develop, and I guess the patterns of advocacy that detransitioners participate in? Well,
the biggest group that I'm in is one that I was invited to, so I didn't start it. And for example, when I wrote the letter regarding Dr. Jack Turbin, I put into that group, I was like, is anyone willing to read this and sign this so we can do it as a group? And most of them weren't willing to, just because the fear was if their name is on this letter, then it would result in backlash. But it was a way for me to get more names, because I felt that a letter with just my name wouldn't have the same impact as a letter with multiple people's names. I don't know how I'd be able to do that publicly, like on Twitter, putting out, can any detransitioners, like that. These groups are particularly useful because they're private, they're kept between us, which is why I won't name any of them. But it's a good way to find a group of people, even if they disagree with you on other things. The one thing that we all have in common is we want better care for detransitioners, trans people, and anyone suffering from gender dysphoria in general.
So I guess that is wanting better care is a purpose that is not as susceptible toward ideological infighting, because you're simply trying to get something better to happen rather than change the culture. Maybe part of that is kind of fighting on a cultural war level in order to break the chokehold that certain groups have on the discussions, and then allowing the medical field to actually have open discussions and propagate information amongst themselves. So there is some sort of cultural warring that goes on, but because it's not an ideological thing so far as, well, I think that a lot of feminism, probably the most fruitful feminism, is stuff that focuses on material needs, such as Julie Bindle's, kind of class-based feminism. It's probably can carry the ball further rather than ideological types of feminist culture war, or any sort of activism group that's not rooted in reality. So I guess that rooted in reality-ness of wanting better care is what kind of keeps the group stable, keeps it on track, and then allows people to have different interpretations and conversations on the ideological level.
Well, you're being very kind to me by saying that we just want better care, because I'm constantly told that I'm trying to steal healthcare away from trans people, by saying that exploratory talk therapy is obviously important before you embark on an irreversible pathway. It's kind of relevant in the UK just now because we've got the conversion therapy proposal going on. All I've ever said about that is talk therapy is important, because if an individual has comorbid conditions, we know from the studies done by people like Ellie Vandenbush and Lisa Lippman that when it comes to detransitioners, there's a very high proportion of them that do have other conditions like depression and anxiety and eating disorders and autism and all these other things. And so that should be discussed before handing over hormones. I'm not saying cease care. I'm not saying take away trans healthcare. I'm saying exploratory talk therapy can only be useful because that is the tool within which we find who will benefit from transition and who won't. So I'm not trying to take care away from anyone. I want it improved rather than removed. But because with this whole conversion therapy thing going on, I don't know how much you know about this, so I'm just going to blanket statement it to you.
Please do, because Canada has done something similar. So I would like to know how they define in the UK this conversion therapy. The concept.
Yeah, Canada's fucked, dude. I'm sorry, but but like in Britain, it's always been conversion therapy was about sexual orientation. You're not allowed to bully someone into changing their sexual orientation, but they've added gender identity to it. So they're saying you cannot change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity through means against their will, or telling them that they're wrong, or telling them that there's something wrong with them. But sexual orientation and gender identity are completely different. Like sexual orientation, you just are. You're gay, or you're straight, or you're bisexual. That's just, you are what you are. And even if you think you're gay and you try it out and you're like, okay, no, maybe not. Like there's no irreversible permanent damage there. Whereas when it comes to gender identity, The root in most cases is puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries, all of which have irreversible consequences. So it's not the same as sexual orientation at all. And so if you've got a young kid and we're seeing a surge specifically of young women and girls, we're talking an increase of thousands of percent who are going to these clinics. Clearly something has happened. It used to be middle-aged men. Now it's girls and young women. And all I would say is I think we should talk to them first, find out what else is going on. If there's something else like depression or suicidal ideation or an eating disorder or something else going on, we can address that first. And then once that's addressed, we can talk about transition. I'm not saying take transition off the table. I'm saying that this is really complicated, and to just ham-fist sexual orientation and gender identity into the same box, it's not this pro-LGBTQ inclusive wonderful thing. It's actually really dangerous.
And in the UK, how is the tenor of the conversation? Is there actual debate about this? Is there any room for nuance and complexity like you're speaking to?
Well, they've put the proposal out. It wraps up on December 10th. So until December 10th, it was out for 6 weeks. Everyone in the UK can respond to the consultation and say whether they think it's a good idea, whether they think it's a bad idea. But you do have the likes of Gender GP and all of these other groups who are saying, like, point blank, this is conversion therapy, trans people are trans, they're born that way. To suggest otherwise is conversion therapy and transphobic and hateful. And I'm in this very unique position as a detransitioner because I'm like, I had gender dysphoria, which was diagnosed by a gender team at a gender clinic, and transition did not help me. So, and I know I'm not the only one. You've got Kira Bell, you've got all the other, you've spoken to lots of them on your channel, and there's even more out there who aren't public. And you're telling me that we just don't matter, that we should just shut the fuck up so that people can continue to be inclusive and affirmative and just hope it works out. Well, I don't just want to hope it works out, because I've spoken to too many young detrans women, and I'm talking 20 and 21 years old, who literally feel that they've ruined their lives. And they're in a really, really fucking bad place. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is talking to these young women. And so when I see these activists, they don't give a shit about individuals. They give a shit about their own ideology. And they're out there saying, if you question a trans child's identity, you're being transphobic and you're engaging in conversion therapy. It's like, well, we know from the studies that if you leave most kids alone, they desist naturally. So why would you just affirm them like that? It's an absolute mess, and I'm convinced that most of the people that are pushing for this conversion therapy bill are in one of two camps. The first one is they don't actually know that it includes gender identity. They think it's like electroshocks for gay people, which is understandable if that was happening, and it isn't in the UK. There's no evidence for it. But if it was, that would be terrible and it would need to stop. And then the other camp is pure ideological, political activism. You need to support trans people no matter what. And they also happen to be the same group of people who will bully lesbians for not wanting to suck dick. So forgive me for not having any sympathy for them or thinking they have any credibility, because it's very clear to me that while they're all about how wonderful transition is and trans people are, they don't give a shit about anyone else.
You said something interesting, and while we are speaking to the issue of gender and conversion therapy and detransition and the topic that you know so much so well, and all of that, there's kind of a deeper question on how to go about affecting change, or how to do good in the world, especially around a cause that you adhere to. And what you said was that they're ideological motivated and they don't give a shit about individual people. There's this weird kind of, there's always this switcheroo where they do care because, suicide stats, and they want to save, they care about the group of LGBT people.
What suicide stats though? This is the thing. They talk a lot about suicide stats. The evidence isn't there. If you dig down and you go and find the study that they're referencing, they're not talking about actual suicide statistics. They're talking about suicidal ideation. They're talking about people reporting that they were feeling suicidal. And I'm not trying to downplay that at all. If you're feeling suicidal, obviously that's important. But when I was a trans man, and I've had this conversation with a lot of other detransitioners, you just said that. If I don't transition, I'll kill myself. It's just something you said because it's what you picked up on these online spaces. It didn't actually mean anything for a lot of us. And so if I was to say to you, Benjamin, give me a study which proves that the suicide rate, not ideation, the suicide rate of the trans community is skyrockets if they're not allowed to transition. You won't find that study. It doesn't exist.
So, point well taken. The motivation behind the allyship mentality is one of empathy, but it seems to be focused on the group level and not on the individual. And so individual anecdotal experience is not as important as the entire blanketed path for the group. The group is for LGBT. It's for... And so then this ideology kind of comes into play, and people might know about it, might not know about it, but they know that they're doing something good or they're participating in something good. And so the ends justify the means, or some eggs need to be broken in order to affect that broad global change. More people, they might be doing some sort of calculus that, yeah, it's okay to ignore detransitioners. It's okay to tell women, to get in their place and to put themselves, behind trans women, which is interesting because the UN, who does that on International Women's Days, tells women to get behind trans women. On International Men's Day, tells men to get behind women. So it's just subversion all the way down. I'm concerned with establishing an ethic with regards to activism, and to be able to say when some group or some broadly defined group that's going under some sort of label is overstepping, or they're harming their cause, or they're doing more harm than good. And so I'm trying to think, how do you do that? And for me, it comes down to always humanize everyone, always humanize the subject constantly, and put that above all else. And if you are hurting a person, even if hurting them will help your cause of saving this group, you've already broken something. You've already violated some sort of basic principle of always humanizing the subject and being humble with regards to going on a case-by-case basis with whatever issue you're fighting for. So,
yeah, I mean, one of the things that bothers me the most about a lot of these sort of trans activist groups is they concentrate solely on trans people, but I would prefer that they focused on gender dysphoric people, because not everyone that has gender dysphoria is going to transition, or if they do, are not going to benefit from it. So, like, I'm sure there's lots of different definitions of what a trans person was. To me, it's always someone who had dysphoria, went through medical transition, and now very happily lives a fulfilling life as a member of the opposite sex to the best that they can. But now we're being told that you don't even need to medically transition. You just say it. You say, I'm trans, and then you're trans. Whereas I'm like, okay, that sounds very inclusive and very rainbowy, but gender dysphoria is an actual condition, and it's incredibly distressing, and we need better support for it. And so if you've got an individual who has gender dysphoria and they transition and it helps them, brilliant. I'm really happy for them. If you have an individual who has gender dysphoria, but because we're doing affirmation only, they're put through transition and then they end up to regretting it, that's equally as important to acknowledge and to attend. And so I'm very, very happy for trans groups to be set up to support trans people. All I want is groups to be set up for detransitioners as well. And it'd be good if we could come together as a group that all experienced this condition called gender dysphoria and say, it doesn't matter if it worked out for you or if it didn't, or if you decided to do it or if you didn't. We all have this condition, so let's sit down and support one another. But I'm not seeing that from these major LGBTQ plus groups. They don't want to hear from people like me.
And yet you keep speaking.
Yeah, I'm stubborn that way.
The gender issue is fascinating because you have, no matter how you cut it, there's men and women involved, and men and women are, no matter how you cut it, different.
So different. Ironically, I realized how different men and women were, particularly while I was living as a trans man. Like, it was this, I mean, I regret my transition, but it was a wonderful learning experience. And ironically, it made me a lot more empathetic towards men. So, I don't know. I think that men and women are obviously different, not just at the biological level, but at the social level as well. And you do have outliers. I can just feel the pissing off that I'm causing in certain groups right now by saying this. But you know what I mean? Like, generally, if you have a group of men and a group of women and you talk to them all, you will see distinct threads of commonality in the group of men and the group of women that don't overlap. There will be threads that do overlap, but there'll also be threads that don't. So it's very, very clear to me that men and women are intrinsically very different. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think that men or women are better than the other sex. I think that we're the same in a different, wonderful way.
So with that brought up, I'm just wondering, well, two things that are the same thing. To what degree can men and women work together on this issue, and to what degree or in what ways do men and women need to respect each other and allow each other to do their own thing?
It would really depend on what brought them to this conversation. So I'd mentioned earlier about the rad femmes battling with the gender critical gay men and things like that. I'll generalize here for brevity, but with the rad femmes, their concern is what's happening to women and girls. And for the gender critical gay men, they're worried specifically what's happening to gay men. And then in the rad femme circle, you've got the lesbians who are particularly concerned about what's happening to lesbians. And then in gender critical groups where it's mothers and fathers, they're worried about what's happening to boys and girls because it's their children. And so I think whenever one of these groups raises a concern that they have, even if you don't necessarily agree with it, they deserve to have that voice put out there. So, like, don't shout them down. If a gay man, a gender critical gay man, wants to come out and talk about how he has been impacted by gender ideology, then just because he's a man and you think he's, you know, oppressing you because you're a radical feminist, like, you're not benefiting anyone by stirring up shit about that.
Yeah, I think, again, it just comes back down to, you can have group level respect and understanding where you key into a gay man as a gay man, but still see him as an individual, but see that his concerns are probably being reflected and purposed toward men and gay men. He's speaking to that, and it would probably be better suited or you know, just say, this isn't about me, this is about this community and stuff. And so the decreasing the level of friction between the sexes or the differently spun sex-based rights groups could bring about more harmony toward a common purpose, even though it can converge on some points, and then it doesn't always have to converge, and there can be a different outcome for different groups. We can do that. So I'm just wondering to what extent one can raise the respect level between these groups, if it's possible. Maybe it's just not possible. Maybe you just have to be as respectful as possible and let people either play along.
I do think it is possible. I mean, I see a lot of it on Twitter, which I won't take as a real reflection of the real world or anything like that. But I mean, for the most part, you have some people in certain groups who have issues with other people in certain groups, and they're going to speak about that as much as they want. But I think for the most part, when it comes to, and you mentioned this earlier, this whole gender ideology thing it's impacting children. And I think it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, if you're gay, you're straight, if you're a parent, if you're not. I think we all have that intrinsic desire to protect children. And so You know, when I went to London to speak at the LGB Alliance, a big portion of that was talking about how a lot of these kids who are going, they're developing dysphoria and seeking transition, most of them turn out just to be gay, you know? So that's what concerns them. That doesn't take away from the fact that not all of these kids are gay. It's impacting children as a group. And I think that most people, regardless of what tribe you belong to, can come together and say, okay, this isn't on. We need to work together and we need to do something about this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When it gets into adult transition, here's something, we don't have to get too far into this, just bring this up for your thoughts, because with regards to so-called autogynephilia, or the autogynephilic impulse within men, the sexual impulse to realize themselves as the object of desire, if we can't speak openly about that because male sexuality is a threat or dirty or something to a certain group that's very active in doing really good work with this and other ways with regards to helping children, if we can't have honest, frank conversations about male sexuality and try to decrease judgment, I don't know to what extent we can actually address that motivation insofar it is a motivation within the trans rights movement. If we can't accept that on just a basic level, I don't think that we can actually give those people an alternative to trans rights activism or radical trans rights activism, because at least they belong over there and they're not shamed over there. They're celebrated.
Exactly. I mean, if you have something, whether it's autogynephilia or something else, what group are you going to gravitate towards? The one that calls you a dirty pervert, or the one that's like, yeah, you're just you and there's nothing wrong with it? I'm not a big fan of the shaming of autogynephilia. I understand the frustration of some women when, you know, you've seen those threads of men who dress up in lingerie and, you know, sneak off to the women's bathrooms to jack off and things like that and say, oh, I'm a woman, you know, and it's like, cough. So I get that it's an area that pisses some people off, but for the autogynephiles that aren't doing that and that can sit down and can just acknowledge that this is something that they have, I don't see any problem with that, and I think they should speak out more about it in the same way that I think their female equivalents should be speaking out about it, because that's the other part that's largely ignored, I would say, in certain groups that I'm involved with, where they'll say all men or males who transition are doing it for sexual reasons, and all women or females who transition are doing it for trauma reasons. So I don't know. I've spoken to a number of detrans women who've confided in me that there was a sexual motivation there. So I'm not buying it. I really think that putting out that blanket statement isn't helping anyone. And if people, whether they're autogynephiles, what's the female version, autoandrophiles, if they had the confidence to be able to speak out and they wouldn't be shamed for being a dirty pervert, I think we could actually learn from one another and learn to help one another.
I came across you after several transformations, and not just physical transformations, but you're in your mid-20s or so when I came across you. So you've thought through a lot of things, and even when you were active on YouTube in a previous incarnation, you're still even known by the people that you disagreed with as somebody to be reckoned with on an intellectual level and argumentative level. And so I just want to ask, to what degree you seem to be very wise. And I'm just wondering, over the past couple years, like, what are some of the things that you've learned with regards to both being more compassionate and being more hardline, like standing your ground and yielding? Like, have there been what are some of the ways that you've developed those skills in this new present incarnation?
I think I'm not saying that people should just take abuse when it's thrown at them. But I have often learned that people make a lot of assumptions about me, and they'll say, oh, it's that D-trans TERF. I've been called a dykey D-trans TERF, and things like that. And your initial instinct is to say, it's a troll, block them. But I've often found that in a lot of these conversations, it's not because they've actually listened to me or read what I've said. They're going off of someone else's opinion. And so if I say, okay, listen, You think that I'm a horrible detrans TERF. Why? Because you believe this. No, I don't. And then you sit and you have a back and forth and you have a conversation. And it was the same, like you'd mentioned back, and while I was a trans man, I was on Twitter and I was on YouTube, and it was the Radfems who were my number one enemy back then. And, you know, a lot of them were really nasty to me. They called me mutilated, and a freak and delusional. And so right out the bat, I was like, fuck these people. I'm not talking to them. And then with detransition, a lot of them started following me and supporting me. And I was like, why? And so I started speaking to them. And I was like, well, the last time that I was on this platform, the radical feminists were calling me a mutilated freak. And they're like, oh, no, I would never say that. And I was like, well, what would you say? And you sit and you have a back and forth, and they'll explain, look, we it probably wasn't that you were mutilated to offend you. It was that they're so upset and emotional over the fact that you do have young women having their breasts removed. Then I would say, okay, fair enough. But you understand that when you said that, not this person individual in particular, but when that was said to me, what did they think I was going to say? Oh, you're right. I'm mutilated and I've ruined myself. Just wait for me to come over and join your side. That doesn't win people over at all. So whenever I get a message or a conversation started with someone and right out the bat they're like, you're transphobic, you're a bigot, you're a terrible person, I don't block them and I don't insult them. I talk to them. I'm like, why do you think that? Why do you think I'm a transphobe? And they'll say, because you think that trans women are men. I don't think trans women are men. I think they're trans women. And then you get a conversation going back and forth. And I'm happy to be friends with people who I strongly disagree with on a lot of things. And I think that being able to talk to the quote other side is probably the only way we're going to solve this. So call me all the names you want. I'm still going to be willing to speak with you. And I think that that is the best way to go forward. Because, you know, you've got these block lists on Twitter where people just, I'm on so many of them, including particular high-profile trans activists who I otherwise would have loved to have had a conversation with. But if you're just going to blanket block people like that, there's no conversation to be had. And if there's no conversation to be had, then we're not going to solve anything.
Solutions. Aren't they a social construct, though? I mean, why is that the value? Why do we want solutions? Maybe they don't want solutions. Maybe you don't want your solutions. You've just tricked yourself into saying that your grab for power is actually just solution oriented.
Lots of people want solutions, just not the solution that would likely come about if their thoughts actually reach the wider public, frankly. I mean, there's some talking points from the other side that I don't agree with, but I understand it. So, for example, saying that a trans woman can never be a lesbian. Objectively, that's true. They can't be a lesbian because a lesbian is a same-sex attracted female, thus trans women not being female cannot be a lesbian. But if you've got a young passing trans woman who's in a relationship with another woman and they're calling themselves a lesbian couple, I don't give a shit. I'm not going to bully them and tell them they can't call themselves that. So it's more, there's the objective reality side of it where words are important, but there's the social subjective side of it where we just show courtesy to people. And a very good example is preferred pronouns. Would you call Buck Angel he, him? I know you have, Benjamin, and I do too, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. But objectively, that's not true because Buck is female. But we do it out of courtesy and politeness and respect because Buck's a good guy. So there's a difference between the objective importance of male and female and why that's so important, and that trans women are male and that's important because at some point in their life they're going to have male-specific health checks like prostate checks and things like that literally only males have. But then there's the subjective social side where it's like, if a passing trans woman is going to call herself a woman in public because to not do that would out her, I'm not going to tell her she can't do that.
With regards to the pronouns, after having considered it, just on a gut level, I I will, but I always in my head have an asterisk on that, and that might
In
be
your
because
head,
of
though, that's the key point.
my gender reactionaryism just cropping up because and then I'll slip into theys and I'll use the theys. I'm more comfortable with the they because I don't have to do the act of adding and then pausing a split second to add that asterisk for the sake of courtesy. The problem, well, the problematics of the distinct subjective versus objective spheres is the bleed that has from the subjective world onto the objective world. If we
Yeah.
can't speak about objectivity within the social sphere because of politeness or because of culture, then it makes the world seem more and more subjective. It distances ourselves from the world. So I guess with regards to the preferred pronouns, where pronouns abut reality that has to do mainly with medical issues, secondarily with sexual mores, and just understanding patterns of male and female behavior, which I think are very strong even within people who transition. A trans woman is going to have more male typical behaviors in a lot of just different ways, and it's important to be aware of that and to see those patterns crop up, and to be able to just be aware of that. So it's just it requires a extra amount of processing power that not everybody can achieve all the time. It's actually kind of exhausting to do those asterisks and then silencing yourself. And so there's just slippage there. So it just has to be handled carefully. And if we can't have the conversation around the trade-offs between courtesy and objectivity, because there are trade-offs when we do that, we should at least have the conversation around that. And then I would hope that if I end up calling someone they rather than their preferred pronouns because of my own beliefs, that they would respect me and see that I am respecting them by using the they. That's a compromise
Isn't that the funny thing, though? It's deemed respectful to use someone's preferred pronouns, but when someone would prefer to use their own preferred pronouns, i.e. not the trans individual's preferred pronouns, that's not respected. And I understand the slippery slope where, the example I gave earlier was a trans woman in a relationship with a woman calling themselves lesbians. I don't have a problem with that, but I completely understand why lesbians would, because that basically opens the floodgates for trans women to call themselves lesbians and go onto lesbian dating apps, and we've already seen that happen. So I'm drifting between the wood where I'm trying to be respectful and kind to my friends, but also not divorce myself from reality. And I understand that people are like, if you're going to call a trans woman a lesbian or a trans man a gay man, you're insulting gay people. And I'm like, well, my own personal experience is that they're already in happy relationships and aren't hurting anyone. But then that completely changes when, lesbians and gay men message me and they're like, I've been banned from a gay app because I said I wasn't interested in a trans person. I'm like, okay, I completely get why you're angry. So it's juggling the subjective politeness that we will offer people and the objective reality that it can't be changed. And it's that sphere in particular that is being pushed these days that's pissing people off.
And you bring up another aspect that it doesn't translate well to social level discourse or cultural level discourse, where I will prefer people call me Benjamin unless they know me, unless we actually have some sort of friendship. Like after I'm friends with somebody, I don't care if they call me Ben, but until that point, and this goes to politeness. This goes to the difference between the in romance languages, they have different pronouns for different levels of of familiarity, the nous and the
Yeah.
vous, right? And in French. And so that's how I, not to trivialize pronouns, but for me, like being called a certain thing, my name is important to me. And that Benjamin is a sign of respect and some sort of distance that we have. And Ben is a sign of some sort of familial or over time developed acculturation that we have in real time, in real space, or over time. And so with regards to pronouns, I'm much more likely to use somebody's preferred pronouns in the trans direction if I already know them or have established some sort of friendship with them.
Yeah, I mean, with things like preferred pronouns, I think if you've got a passing trans individual who is put in the effort, basically, we're talking about the Blair Whites and the Buck Angels. Don't have a problem there. It's when we're talking about, you know exactly what I'm talking about because I know you've seen it on Twitter, and it's these men who put on a wig or some lingerie and say they're a woman and that their pronouns are she, her. I'm not doing it. Like, I'm not doing it. So, like, for me, if I respect you or I have no reason to not respect you, I'm happy to use your preferred pronouns. That's the level that I'm at. But if you're going to be one of these people who says, Benjamin, if you won't sleep with a trans woman, you've got a genital fetish and you're transphobic and you better start sleeping with trans women, they can go and fuck themselves.
Yeah, but well, yeah, they've violated the boundary of common courtesy.
Yeah.
They've exempted themselves from that. They've forced themselves out of that extension of courtesy.
I mean, I know that you're the one doing the interview, but if I can ask you a question,
Sure.
like, where do you stand on, for example, you've sort of been observing this as an interviewer for a long time. Do you think that the, for lack of a better term, gender critical movement is making strides? Or do you think that they're stagnant? Or do you think that they're going backwards? Do you think that they're succeeding in bringing awareness to the more insane part of gender ideology?
That is a good question, and I've had a lot of conversations in private message portions of social media about this because a number of different detransitioners and trans people and otherwise gender critical people and otherwise feminists and otherwise moderates and otherwise just people that are concerned about this issue. There's a theme of being wary about the methods of certain portions, certain groups that would label themselves either rad femmes or gender critical feminists. I think that there's certain tactical tendencies that are very difficult. They're very difficult, and you're not supposed to say that because now I'm using the term difficult women, and you're never supposed to call women difficult, right? So it's just the whole line of questioning, and over my experience of pissing off a certain contingent of that, either large or small contingent of that, it usually comes down to me triggering a pre-programmed response in the language. Like I'll use the first big time, I made a distinction between rationality in men and emotional intelligence in women, and that triggered things. And I used the word WHORE in a pun, and horror was a triggering word for them because that is that word itself has power to demean and diminish their group. And so what I'm bringing up is that with that there's a certain strain within that group that is very language based and is really concerned with proper terms or with proper arguments that's really bound up in language in such a way that you can't even play with the language or playing with the language. Nobody can read irony into that. They can only read ill intent or you need to change your words with regards to if you call a woman a young woman or a girl, or if you perceive to be too familiar with a female, that's somehow diminishing her. Like if I compliment a woman or if I use a certain tone of voice, I will be translated as being some sort of creep or some sort of like really disrespectful thing. So on a certain level, so there's that mode of being triggered that I see, but the intensity to which that triggering occurs, and then the intensity of the group response toward a man that they've singled out is finally proven to be bad. And then the policing of my language that happens afterwards with that it's a very insulating tactic that is applied over and over and over again to otherwise not centrist, but otherwise complex or nuanced invested people. And so there's a hardcoreness or a fundamentalism and a puritanism that's sprinkled with daddy issues that makes it very religious and very anti-religious at the same time, that I think holds the movement back from building better bridges. And many very smart women who would ascribe themselves as radical feminists or as gender critical don't participate in that and don't forward that movement, and should somehow be able to limit that behavior from becoming the defining characteristic of that group. So it's up to them to redefine themselves, and I can't do that for them.
One of the things that I've kind of noticed, and it sounds so silly because we're talking about Twitter, but I've kind of noticed that there's a lot of people, and I won't name them because I'm not trying to start some shit, but I know that there's certain views that they don't agree with it, but they don't call it out when certain prominent people on their quote side does it. Whereas for me, like, I don't know, if I see something I don't like and I disagree with, and I have done it multiple times before, even if I'm very fond of this person, I'll say, I don't agree with you. Why would you say that? And I think on some instances, there's a case where you don't want to piss off or sort of defriend yourself from the prominent people in your group. And I suppose that's understandable on a certain level, but at the same time, you know, if you're in a group and one of your big names says something ridiculous, it's beholden upon you to call them out on it and say, I don't think you should have said that, or I don't understand why you said that, or I disagree with that, and then have a healthy debate. Whereas it started to piss me off only just a couple of months ago, where I noticed I was going on and I was seeing things that I wasn't liking, and I was responding to it, and none of the other people that I knew agreed with me were speaking up because the person I was responding to was prominent. And I was like, okay, if this was a stupid little account with an anime avatar, you'd have no problem saying that you don't agree with them, but because it's a prominent person, you're just gonna hush up. That's not good for a movement at all. And I know they're like, we can't divide and we need to stick together. Well, we also need to be able to have friendly disagreement. That's the central stone of any healthy movement, is that you should be able to say, we need to talk about this because we're not all on the same page there. We might not end up agreeing in the end, but we need to talk about it.
Yeah. I brought that up with regards to the anti-woke movement that I've been classified in because of the way that I've responded to what we generally call wokeness, right? When I noticed a pattern of behavior of people acculturating themselves to responding en masse to a certain negative stimulus with regards to these 30-second videos or 90-second videos, which happens also within the gender critical or the gender ideological critical movement, where there's these really ridiculous videos that just get passed around, and some of those videos are from very confused young people.
Are you
and
talking
some
about
of
the TikTok videos?
Yeah, TikTok.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a big overlap between the gender craziness and then other woke domains. So those videos will be shared within the trans skeptical or the gender ideological skeptical movement, and then the broader anti-woke movement. And again, the videos that are shared within the gender critical or whatever that movement is, broadly speaking, are you can divide them into basically adults and children.
Yeah.
And children should probably be extended to 22 or 23 because just how sheltered a lot of these individuals are. But then there's certain accounts. There's this one account who is perfect at ticking people off. And I noticed that it was just purely perfectly marketed to do this. And so I just, whenever somebody shares it with me or whenever I see it shared over and over and over again, I say, don't give them any attention because that is what they want. They want the attention.
Yeah.
So I bring all that up because there is this acculturation to a negative stimulus, especially with these videos, that allows the group to feel righteous together, to coalesce around a denunciation movement, and then to resist any resistance to that denunciation, resist any questioning. Say, well, what if we think about it a little bit more deeply? And also, if a group is coalescing around negatively responding to specific stimulus, then when they perceive something that's not as egregious but still questions them, they'll be just as negatively
Yeah.
all aligned in one direction. And so a group that starts to do that, just positively being on a war with the out group, will tend to start to banish from its ranks any sort of friction. And then also you have a lot of status games too that you were kind of bringing up. The status game is really interesting too.
My particular problem with the TikTok videos is, as you mentioned, some of them are kids. Even if they're 18, 19, 20, they're still kids. And so whenever one of these things come up where it's some, fucking 19-year-old with her hair dyed and she's talking about neo-pronouns and all this, I'm like, I'm so glad that my cringy teenage life was not put out there to be ridiculed by thousands of people, because I'd never live it down. So I don't react to those TikToks, the ones with the young kids. The adults, it's different. I suppose you could make an argument that it isn't necessarily, but I think, look, if you're a full-grown bloke and you're sitting there saying that lesbians are transphobic because they won't suck your dick, you're a fucking cunt, and I don't like you very much. But I mean, for a lot of the TikToks that are shared, and they're reacted to by very prominent people. You've got people like Ben Shapiro responding to these TikToks on his channel. Some of these kids, they must be as young as 16 or 17. Why are you mocking them to an audience of hundreds of thousands of people? You were just as cringy as a teenager. You just didn't have social media to put it out there for everyone to laugh at. And a lot of these kids are going to grow up and it's going to affect them. So that trend in particular with the younger people, I'm not behind it at all. But with the more insane shit, like what was the one recently? No, in fact, it wasn't a TikTok. It was the assistant professor who was defending MAPS, pedophiles, Alan Walker, whatever their name was. I'm not entirely sure what they are. I'm more than happy for them to be mocked and dragged through the mud for that. I don't give a shit. But that's not the same as some, ideologically possessed teenager that doesn't know any fucking better. And I don't like that those two cases are treated with the same vitriol by certain groups.
Not going to get into the map thing. That was what almost sparked my most recent foray into miniature cancellation. If I don't mean egotistically, like I'm so important that people want to cancel me, but it seems to happen. But I was just trying to make a very subtle distinction between the act and the orientation, if it is an orientation or if it is a inclination. Mm-hmm. It should be provided therapy to prevent the act from happening.
Yeah,
and
course.
At the same time, I don't think that society should stray away from a rather strong stigma against it. So there's a balance. There's a balance between allowing this social stigma to steer society and to diminish that behavior, but also a lifting of that within a therapeutic context. So I was just calling for nuance with regards to people who are, and I've spoken with these researchers who we both know, who've really investigated that, and people who've dealt with on a therapeutic level with people who've acted or who have not acted on that impulse. And so we just need a little, during that whole, Alan Walker thing, there was a lot of other conflations that were going on. I was just trying to just slow down the thing. I'm not for the act. Mm-hmm. And it's really important, but we need to understand that there's other arguments that need to be voiced, or other positions that have other things. And Alan Walker, going along the queer theory route, makes it really even more difficult.
That was my main concern with it was conflating it with just every other sexual orientation. Like, if you're a paedophile and you haven't acted, you have my sympathy. I'm so fucking. I can't imagine what it must be like to have an attraction that you know is wrong, deeply, deeply wrong. And so if you don't act on it, I hope you get all the help you need. I hope you get the therapy. I hope that there's something that can be done to help you. But I'm deeply uncomfortable with the effort on some people and groups attempt to say that it's just another orientation, like gay or straight or bisexual. That's what bothers me. I don't think it is, because my main point would be, you know, if you're a straight man and you see a sexy woman walking down the street, you're like, oh, she looks good, you know. So you can approach her and she can consent to that if she wants to. Children can. It's completely different, and I don't think that you can lump what they're now calling minor attraction into healthy adult sexuality. So my sympathy for the paedophiles that do not want to act on that. I really do hope that they can get help, but I will push back against any attempt to normalize it. I don't think that will lead to anywhere good.
Yeah, and that was basically my point. But of course, it's a tweet, so you can only fit so much splitting of hairs in that. But there's this, again, going back to male sexuality, specifically male sexuality, but I guess sexuality in general, there's this straight, and then the gay and bisexual, and then the other. And to what extent can we maturely deal with beyond the orientation, and then the conflation of gender into that is really difficult. But if it seems like there's a middle ground between pedophilia, which is really, really difficult to talk about, and then homosexual rights, which is much easier to talk about. If you go back 20 years, it would have been a lot harder to talk about. And then heterosexuality, which is even still really difficult for us to even talk about and have mature conversations about that. I mean, there's just so much difficulty to talk about that. But again, if we can, I don't know. I just wish I could put out there that we can have a little bit of grace with regards to autogynephilia and allowing male sexuality to be discussed, and without just applying disgust to that. But people are going to do that, and there's probably very good evolutionary biological or traumatic reasons for people to want to shame men that step out of a very narrow bound of behavior. And I can understand that there's that pushback, but not everybody feels that. But people who do feel that seem to be very vocal about their.
I mean, I could share a personal thing with you that might make people uncomfortable, if you like.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Uncomfortable conversations with Benjamin Boyce.
While I was still identifying and living as a trans man, and I've spoken about this before, my sexuality went through a change. Prior to transition, I thought of myself as a lesbian. I was exclusively attracted to women. And then the massive jump in libido when I was on testosterone apparently awoke in my inner bisexual, and I developed an attraction for men. And I was using Tinder and like hookup apps like that as a trans man. Most of the women rejected me. There was a lot of men who identified themselves as gay in their profiles who showed interest. And I was like, you know, because we were talking about it earlier that there's some gender critical gay men who are really pissed off with the idea that a gay man would hook up with a trans man. Because I personally experienced it, I don't think it's ridiculous. I think it's entirely possible. But I also noticed that with one of the men in particular that I spoke to, he opened up to me about his autogynephilia. And presumably he did it because I was a trans man and he thought that he could open up about something like that with me. And I was like, are you going to transition? And he was like, well, no, I don't want to be a woman. I get off to wearing women's underwear, basically. And I was like, oh, okay, doesn't hurt anyone. And I never really thought anything about it for a long time. And then I detransitioned and I came on Twitter and I saw all these different sort of opinions and people saying that autogynephilia was this horribly perverted, deviant thing that harms women and things like that. And I think it can in certain circumstances. if men are going to use it to pretend that they're women and bully lesbians. But other than that, I mean, if it's kept in the bedroom, as with any other sexual thing or fetish, I don't think it's that much of a problem. I think if it's kept in the bedroom and it's private and it's between consenting adults, I don't think it should be shamed.
The question about normalization and where does it end is it's a really difficult conversation. It's a really difficult conceptual kind of map that you have to make of that which is the ideal or that which is normal, not necessarily making that which is not as normal wrong, but then there's stuff that's beyond normal that it goes further and further away from the norm. And at some point there's this, maybe we shouldn't go there. Or maybe we can say that that's there, but we shouldn't go there. So it's just difficult, and this is the slippery slope argument, or trying to re-engineer the slippery slope argument to make the further down you go on the slope actually provides more and more resistance, right? So there is an ideal, which would be, and I'm bringing this up not because I'm ascribing this, but just trying to conceptualize the difference between where do we stop with acceptance, where do we stop with normalization, where do we do that? I brought that up with Jonathan Peugeot, who's a Greek Orthodox icon carver. And he said within his church, within the Greek Orthodox Church, there is the ideal of male and female only, male and female in a productive sexual relationship, which would mean within the confines of marriage and then with child as the product. And then everything beyond that is not the ideal, which doesn't mean that that's the only thing that's possible. That means that we all don't lift that ideal, but that ideal is the ideal because, because why? I mean, I guess you could say a religious explanation of that, or you can just say a biological and evolutionary perspective of that. But it's all right to have the normal be that which we are striving for, and to have the beyond the pale is something that we strive against. And finding all of ourselves as brethren or as siblings on this distribution chart where we are trying to ultimately improve everybody else's life properly and carefully, especially when you get beyond a certain level. And it's really easy to go from what straight people do to their bedrooms to what gay people do to their within their bedrooms. And then, but beyond that, it just there needs to be ample conversation, and the progressive push to include the gays and lesbians and bisexuals in normality isn't equipped with arguments against extending that all the way down to the P in the acronym.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think you need to have a religious reason for that. I think it's obvious the ideal for raising children would be having one mother and one father. Just because they bring different things to the table. That's not to diminish single mother or single father households or same-sex parent households at all. Of course not. But we've already established that men and women are different and they bring different things to the table. And so the ideal, as you say, would be having one mother and one father raising a child or children. That doesn't mean that you can't raise a child in a single-parent household or a same-sex household in a beautiful, wonderful, perfectly healthy, productive way. Of course not. But, you know, we've gotten to the stage where if you were to acknowledge that the ideal would be a mother and a father, and I'm saying this as an atheist, this is not coming from a religious place at all, I think it's just common sense. Whereas now we're living in the time where that would be branded single mother phobic, homophobic, and all these other kind of phobics. And it's like, no, mothers and fathers bring different skills and they do different. It's like, I was raised by a mother and a father. They were very different in their parenting techniques.
And they were both cunts.
They were both absolute cunts. I love them to death. But yes, they made me who I am today. Make of that what you will.
Just to switch gears, do you drive, by the way?
I drive,
People
yes.
drive? Yeah. Do they have stick? Do you drive stick? I don't know why I'm asking.
Most people in this country do. The whole
Oh,
automatic
really?
thing isn't very common here.
Oh, really? Okay. Do you like being crazy behind the wheel? Do you do racing and stuff like that? Do you ever like just
No,
go for it?
I'm really well behaved behind because I don't have a car right now. I had a car early in the year because I was doing delivery driving work as a job, and then I was in a car crash, and my
Oh, no.
car was written off, and so now I don't have a car. Don't worry, nobody was hurt. It was a very small crash, but it wrote off my piece of shit car, so I currently don't have one. Um, it's more, I wouldn't be a crazy driver because I don't trust other drivers enough. I have no fucking trust in them at all. Whenever I go out, the amount of shitty drivers that I've seen where I'm like, I'm sharing a road with this mad asshole. So I'm a very careful driver, but currently without a car.
I just discovered that about 15 miles away there's a racetrack, and I've been contemplating getting into racing and handling and all that stuff, just as something
As long
completely
as it's on
different.
a racetrack,
Yeah,
absolutely you should.
yeah. But that was neither here nor there. I just thought about switching gears and what I've been obsessed with outside of this conversation, which is switching how to properly use a gear shift on a racetrack. But I brought up your skills on communication outside or in the public sphere, and we kind of looked into that. You brought up that you basically have become a counselor. It sounds like you do a lot of counseling. I wonder if are you inclined to expand on that and to actually do that officially, or are you inclined to maximize that skill and make that a part of something that you do
There
officially?
is there is something in the works, and because it's not set in concrete yet, I can't go into detail about it. But there is something that I'm currently talking about with other people who are far more educated in this area than me about something that we could do. For the past 2 years, I've basically just, if a detransitioner messages me and they're not in a good place, I'm just a shoulder to lean on. That's all I do. I don't even say that much. I just sit and I listen. And if they say what's going to happen to me, and I'm like, you're going to be okay. You were on testosterone for X amount of time, so if you go to your GP, you can get tested. You can see if you're still fertile. Blah blah blah, and just sort of act as what I wish I had. Basically, it's just someone that I could go to who had been through it and knew what was going to happen to just give me that little extra bit of comfort. But I don't have any qualifications or anything. I'm a university dropout. I'm not an educated person. But I can speak from experience, which so far has went really well. I mean, every younger detransitioned woman that I've spoken to have remained in contact with me and say that they're doing better, and say that, trying to get them to go to therapy is like pulling teeth. They don't want to go back, but some of them need to because of some of the other issues they have. And I'm like, listen, I know you had such a shitty experience. I did too. This needs to be addressed because it might need medicalized, so you're gonna have to go and speak to somebody. And you just sit there and you're their rock to lean against when they don't have anyone else. So it's not a professional setting. It's literally we sit and have a drink and a chat over Zoom is basically the extent of my counselling. But I am wanting to make it a little bit more, for lack of a better word, professional, and hopefully that will happen.
Because every time we speak, I think I prod you into doing more awesome things like writing or studying or you call yourself a university dropout, but that could be all you have to do is like fill out some paperwork and you're back in the university.
I mean, no, I do really appreciate it because, like, when people like yourself say things like that, I don't know, because I've never thought of myself as like a smart person, and I'm not meaning that in a like self-derogatory way or a modest way. I'm just, my background is I grew up dirt poor, and we weren't an educated family or area, and I've just never had that I don't know what you would call it, that push to, like, when I went to uni, it shocked everyone in my family. They were like, why? Like, we're just going to go and see what happens, you know? And so to be in a situation where I'm talking to people and they were like, you should look into this. I'm like, that's very flattering, but also unexpected.
I don't know Scotland at all. I don't know all the different. I don't know the socioeconomic spread and then what's kind of expected of the different classes. It seems to me that there's a different sort of classism between the Americas and Great Britain, broadly speaking, all those islands over there. There's just a different kind of approach to class, and it seems less porous. Like what's class is a little bit more porous out here, especially culturally. We hide our classism, and which makes dealing with the elite and the upper class, the true upper class, really difficult because they're always. And I think that you see that in the politics on the UK, like the Labour Party, which was supposed to be about working class, is now the elite class, but they have this weird kind of veneer of really being the beneficiaries of the lower classes, and that's what we have out here. So it's just the cultures are different, and there's a lot of miscommunication, I think, between our cultures that if you're not hip on, you don't understand subtleties and just the ideological outlook between our two countries and Australia, for that matter.
Yeah, I'm still learning a lot about America and Canada and Australia and other countries because in that ignorant way, you just assume that everyone else is like you, and then you speak to more people and you're like, oh, actually, there's a lot of things, not just the word, about my country that's different in other countries, you know.
Is there is there like an oral tradition in your family? You said that they were not educated, but I'm sure that there was storytelling or some sort of tradition or kind of cultural passing on of knowledge. Was there something like that kind of?
I think the closest thing would probably be old tales and magic tricks. So my great granddad taught my granddad, who taught my dad, who taught me. So I'm very good at card tricks, and I wouldn't be able to pull a story out of my head because it's been such a long time since I thought about it. I would need to sit and think about it again. But there's a couple of little things where, like, growing up in those magic tricks and those little stories, and I've got my granddad's original set of cards where they're like paper thin, they're like dyed yellow from smoke, they've got burners in them, but they must be like, God, I don't know, 60 years old or something like that. And it's this smelly deck of cards, but it means so much to me. I might not have been the inheritance of lots of money or land or wealth, but that deck of cards is all I fucking needed.
Do you guys have does your family have a kind of a memory of where it ended up throughout? I'm just thinking of like, have you heard stories about what was going on with your family during World War II and how that affected your ancestors, or I guess your great grandparents or your grandparents? Is that something that hovers in the background, kind of?
Well, we just missed it. My granddad on my mum's side served in the war, but he died in prison before I was born, so I never met him. And then my granddad on my dad's side just missed the cutoff. I think he was born in 1930, so he just missed the cutoff for the age limit to go over and fight in the war. So we don't have, as far as I'm concerned or knowledgeable, we don't have any veterans in the family. But when my grandparents were alive, they very much spoke about the war days and about how ungrateful the younger generations are. My mum would always tell me these stories about how, if she was sent to bed without her dinner because she was being a little cunt, my granny would be like, when I was your age, we had one slice of bread a day, So I really like those old stories because apparently my granny was just a tyrant to my mother, just a terrible fucking person, but she was always as sweet as an angel to me and my sister. So when my granny died and my mum was like, she'd beat the shit out of us with a belt. And I'm like, my granny would never do that. My granny would never hurt a fly. You know? So it's that wonderful thing of seeing the progress and how she treated the children in her life.
Yeah. Have you guys been in that same area for generations, or did you guys?
Yeah, sort of scattered about, even if it's not the exact same area, always close proximity. So where I live now is 5 minutes away from my mother's house and like 25-minute drive from my granddad's house that my dad was raised in. So we're very much still in the same area, still know all the familiar faces and all the neighbours and things like that. They're confused as fuck about me. They're like, when did Andrew and Brenda have a son? I'm like, yeah, a son. And then now I'm back as Sinead again. They're like, how's your twin brother doing? I'm like, he's fine. He's moved across country. Oh, bless them.
Beyond the gender aspect of politics, what is something about Scotland that I just wouldn't necessarily know about their participation, I guess, in the EU? Did you guys separate, or were you able to not do the Brexit thing? Is that a
Well,
big thing?
no, Scotland voted against Brexit, but because we were under Westminster, when England voted for Brexit, we left as well. Which is one of the reasons why there is this massive increase in Scotland right now for another independence referendum, because one of the things that they were told that if you don't get independence, if you remain a part of the UK, then Brexit won't happen. And then Brexit happened, and now there's a new increase in the SNP saying, "Oh, we're going to get our independence." I don't know, the stereotype that you might have of Scots might not be entirely accurate. There absolutely are some just insanely pro-independence people here where you just can't talk to them. They're just independence, independence. But for myself and for the vast majority of the people I know, we're pro-independence. We want Scotland to be independent, but like it's not in front of our priority list, if you know what I mean. There's other things I'd rather be talking about, and it's nothing to do with English hate. I've got English family that I love very much. My dad's down in England, and I go down there once a year to see him. It's nothing to do with wanting Scotland to separate because of how evil the English are. It's just you would like the idea that your country could be independent and could stand on its own feet, and that's basically where it ends for me and for most other people. Whereas I'm sure you've heard the stereotype of or die and fuck the English and all this. And it's like, they do exist, but they're rare in my experience.
Well, I'm sure you've heard the stereotype of Americans going around torching buildings and then other Americans going around and shooting them in the face, and then other Americans going around and burning more buildings and other Americans shooting them.
I don't believe you, Benjamin. I think you're all nuts.
We are nuts. Do you think that Scotland being independent is economically feasible? You guys want more direct responsibility or direct trade with the EU? Do you think that's what it is, or is it more kind of just about?
That has become complicated since Brexit has happened. If Brexit hadn't happened, I'm a little bit more knowledgeable about that. But presumably, if Scotland was to get its independence now, it wouldn't immediately be put back into the EU. We would just be an independent Scotland, and we would need to have conversations about what happened from there. And just being completely honest with you, I've been too busy with other things that I couldn't have a proper discussion with you about that. It's something I'll look into. Once I'm done with this and the conversion therapy stuff, I plan to be a good patriot and look into an independent Scotland.
Well, I mean, not converting those who don't need to be converted physically into another manifestation of gender is actually, saving your country and patriotic.
That's the point. I'll put that on my independent Scotland slogan against conversion therapy.
Speaking of that, what's the state of that? Are there resources that people who can participate in that discussion? I guess you said that that's wrapping up in a few weeks here, in about a month, it seems like.
So if you're in the UK, you can respond to the consultation. I can send you that and you can put it in the little thing if you want. It doesn't wrap up until December 10th. So we've got a little while left. I highly doubt you can respond to it if you're not in the UK. I haven't specifically checked that because I don't know why someone who's not in the UK would want to, unless you're a UK citizen abroad type of thing. But yeah, if you're in the UK and you're concerned about conversion therapy, specifically relating to trans kids, I would definitely fill it out because I know too many people who've said, you know, it's terrible. And I'm like, have you responded to the consultation yet? And they're like, oh, I'll get around to it. I'm like, I've been there. No, you won't. So if you're in the UK and you want to respond, then it takes 5 minutes. It took me 5 minutes. So.
And if anybody who happens to be a detransitioner wants to contact you, if you have links that we could put in for like gender or general gender resources, we can put that in.
Yeah.
Have you stood by your refusal to start back up a YouTube channel since we last spoke?
I probably won't be putting out videos regularly. I still haven't made another one, but there are videos that I want to make that are in my periphery that I will get round to at some point. But as far as being like an active, regular posting channel, it's not going to happen. I'll put out videos when I have something to say, but I won't be pushing out content just for shits and giggles. So
okay, well, yeah, but is there any other content? Is there any content whatsoever that you push out for shits and giggles that we can look forward to, or is it just interviews with yours truly and other media sensations?
basically, I kind of overdone it for a couple of months there. Like, you know, I appeared on Canadian TV and traveled to London and stuff like that. So I was like, for December, I'm taking a break. I'm just not going to do anything at all. I'm going.
Nice.
I mean, I'll probably get drunk and go on Twitter and rant, but as far as actually doing anything in December, I'm probably not going to do that.
You're a quality drunk ranter. I can tell everybody that. And
I'm not even that drunk. I've only had 6 beers. Yeah.
Is there? Speaking of December, is there like a Scottish specific holiday festivity that you guys do, like some sort of torching of the grounds or running of the foxes or some kind of odd thing that you guys are looking forward to next month?
If there is, it's not native to my area. We just have Christmas stuff.
Okay.
So we'll go every year. I take my nieces and nephews to the annual lighting of the Christmas lights. Where, you know, you get to spend 5 hours with 3 children that don't want to be there, so you can go look at the pretty lights, and they just want to look at their fucking phones, and you're like, I don't know why I do this, but I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'll wrap up the recording now. Thanks, Sinead, for another wonderful visit.
And thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It is. It is. And there. Wait. Oh, stop.